recording. Wait a minute. Are we live?
We're live.
Is this
live
really
and in
happening?
person?
Wow. Ness, how are you? I'm Alonso. It's,
Good. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well. This table talk thing is great. It's switched to an online presence and an online platform, and it's done really well. It's been a great time of discussing some topics that we had a chance to sometimes connect a little bit before we went live and go through some things. And man, in those archives, Ness, there's some good material.
Yeah,
some crazy stuff too.
So part of that, of us going live, because I was liking the what do we call it? What's the platform we
Zoom?
Zoom.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was liking the Zoom platform, but at the same time, we've done some things behind the scenes that will enhance the way people could view us. One of those mainly, and I listen to Apple Podcasts all the time. I know there's different podcasts out there, and so Table Talk to me is one of those things that I always thought should be on a podcast when people are driving or people want to way to fall asleep. They can put something on, but so I'm excited, and the reason being is now we have our own platform. We have the app, the Freedom Worship Center app. You just look up Freedom Worship Center, and we should pop up. And if you need to narrow it down more, Freedom Worship Center -NM. We're also on Apple TV, Roku TV, or Roku, and then the different podcast platforms as well. We're still on Facebook and YouTube, and the other podcast that I looked into for us that we're live on also is well, of course, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and then TuneIn. So we're all across all those platforms, and it's just something that I envision, especially when we do Table Talk. We go in depth about so many topics that myself, when I listen to certain podcasts, I'm like, I like to hear people go back and forth and conversate about different subjects, and I think Table Talk hits just right for the podcast platform. And I know people do join us on Facebook as well, and that's kind of our biggest following. But it's just something special about I think having this on podcast platform for me.
Yeah. No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. There's well, I guess we should be sharing this too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's a whole benefit that we have of when you click on Facebook, and like the last screen that you had a video playing of somebody welding.
Oh, I thought that was someone shooting.
I don't know what it was. Did somebody welding and they're cutting metal? So in a minute here, I'm going to mute myself and I'll go ahead and share the stream to my page. But yeah, Ness, there's a lot to be said for sometimes the depth of things that you can get into in a podcast setting. But for me, it's all the stuff that goes in the background. Right? Like by the time we go live, and by the time we have topics that we're discussing, I've really enjoyed and I've grown personally through the study. Prior to every table talk. Sometimes we have a clearly defined topic. We've experimented a few topical journeys where we took several weeks to cover some things, and it's been great experience learning and understanding a bit more about communicating through this platform. I look forward to being able to continue developing these skills and these gifts and applying them in other areas.
Yes. And even thinking back, there's some times that we go over some subjects, and I'm curious years from now to go back and see my thoughts and even your thoughts and our perspectives if they've changed on certain topics as well. I know throughout ministry over the years, 10 years, 11 years or so, I know some of the ways I used to believe and some of the ways I used to see things has changed. And you could compare that to maybe growth or just perspective and life coming your way. I know today we labeled this one waiting on God's timing, and that's one of those things is kind of looking back is in our lives we could see that when we wanted certain things to go our way, and maybe it didn't happen at that time, and we didn't understand. Flash forward into the future. Sometimes myself, I'll say, well, good thing God didn't answer the prayer I thought at the time was for me, because He had something better for me. So even in that transition, because people may say, well, God didn't answer my prayer. And I don't know if we ever think of, well, did He substitute the prayer you asked for something better?
Yeah.
And I say that because even in my relationship with April, and I'm just being really transparent. My girlfriend before her, I thought my world was ending when we broke up and whatnot, and little did I know, flash forward, I wouldn't have changed a bit. And I just reference that because there are some people who are falling so in love with certain people that they're like, God, why would you let them leave me? Why would you allow this to happen? And for myself, and I could just speak looking back now, I'm like, well, I'm glad he didn't answer that prayer, but He did give me something that was more suited for me. Being that the woman I met, April, she's the one that drugged me. Well, she didn't drag me to church 11 years ago, but she's the one that took me to church. Yeah. And would I have had that opportunity otherwise? It probably was there, but would I have took it? Probably not. And so my life would look very different now. And so it's one of those things, waiting on God's timing, right? And it was crazy because after in between relationships, before I met April, I told God, God, I'm not gonna settle down unless you give me a woman my age, and I was 26 years old. Unless you give me a woman my age with no kids, could have kids, and I just really put it out there. And when I met April, we laughed because one of our first conversations, and it sounds crazy, I told her, "Can you have kids?" And she probably freaked out and said, "What kind of question is that?" But it was because I was in a prior relationship for 4 or 5 years, and I wasn't fully committed because she couldn't have kids, so that withheld me also. But I knew that I wanted kids, and that was a desire. And so at that point, I was like, I'm not gonna settle. And so like all the specifics that I put out there was in April, which was kind of beautiful the way it worked, because April had been previously married for 10 years and didn't have kids. So I'm like, is something wrong with you? Can you have kids? And she was like, I don't think nothing's wrong with me. And 4 kids later, married, in ministry, here we are. And it's one of those things, waiting on God's timing, right? What was our timing? Waiting for us to be equally yoked with someone that God had in store for us, because she had a pretty rough relationship as well, to where her husband at the time kind of chose drugs over their relationship, and so like the value that we had towards relationship, I think, was changed, but within each other we saw that with God in it, it made the value and what we have in our relationship very special and very unique.
That is very, very powerful. And Ken's not here today, right? Like this brings up some of these discussions that sort of circulate around, free will versus determinism, and how people, how we look at the Bible and apply what we read in the Bible to the way people make choices.
Yeah.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I was thinking about this, when we were talking about the topic, and the word I'm going to use a word that comes from the word romance, okay? But I don't mean like, love and snuggles. That's not what I mean. So people will use, you could say it's a literary device. They'll talk about the romanticization of things, right? And to romanticize something means you think it better than it was, right? Or you imagine it, or think or imagine it better than it was. It's really just kind of a good base definition. But I think sometimes when we look at the Bible, we may want to romanticize, right? Not fall in love with, but romanticize some of the texts that we see. And I think it applies. We then take that because we've romanticized it. We've imagined it better than it maybe was, or we've imagined it in a way that suits our liking, right? Yeah. So then we look back at stuff, and exactly as you say, it's pretty easy to fit stuff into a mold that says, well, God wanted it this way.
Yeah.
Right. And so the reality is behind all of these things are all those different choices that people make. And so the question of God's timing does, to a degree, rise to the level of understanding what time is,
Yeah.
and where God fits in time and where we fit in time, right? So as I heard you lay out, these different things you've got, the standards that you had. Of course, you never mentioned the standards April had. Like I've heard you now. I've heard you tell me. I'd say at least 5 times.
Yeah.
Because I got one hand. At least 5 times. Like at least 5 times. You've told me the story of the things that you wanted in a husband, and I actually haven't heard from you if April got what she was asking for in a husband. So we might have to.
She did, tall, dark, handsome, and a fighter, right?
And humble, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just like Moses, right?
Yeah.
There was no one more humble than Moses anywhere on the earth.
Exactly.
No, all kidding aside, the beauty is, I think spiritual maturity allows us that license to be able to go back and look at that and say, man, I can totally see God was in that, and thank God for it, because the path that I was on, I was not headed for a place that was good for me. And I think you said as much, right?
Yeah. Well, so one of those things, right? Because if I'm transparent, who I was before I came to Christ, because I've had a relationship with God. Maybe it wasn't the best relationship ever since I was a little kid. When times I was kind of one of those 911 prayer guys. Anytime I needed help, I was praying to God. I knew who God was, but as life went on, I became this guy, I guess gratifying the flesh, to where yes, I was a fighter, and I was really into myself, I guess, because I was fighting. I wanted to be a good fighter. I lusted after many women at that time, and then I was just on a path of destruction. And I remember one time having, and this dream really spoke to me, because God speaks to me through dreams. And I had this one dream that I was seeing the world, and there was 3 tornadoes, and one was like of lava, one was of lightning, and one was of fire. And they were just going around and just tearing up the whole world. It was destroying the world before me. And I remember being very scared, and God started talking to me. I knew it was God because I wouldn't even want to look. I didn't want to look at him because I was so ashamed. And the thing in the dream, he was talking to me in a different language, and I didn't understand it. But I knew it was God, and I knew I was ashamed. And I woke up and I was freaked out, and I didn't know what was going on. So my grandma, who I know she's very spiritual, has a very good walk in Christianity. I went and explained to her my dream, because I would do that. She was my spiritual person. When things like that happen, I'd go to her, and she would just tell me, well, pray to God that He'd give you the interpretation. At the time, I don't know if I did at the time, but looking back, what I got from the dream was I was on the path to destruction, and I was hearing, even though I knew of God, and even though I prayed to God, I didn't understand Him. And so when He was speaking another language to me, that was like, I was looking back now that I truly wasn't His sheep, because I guess I heard His voice, I didn't understand His voice. Right, and I don't know if there's a big difference with that.
There's a huge topic I would love to dig into there.
So kind of just trying to get this back to God's timing. That was put before me. I didn't change right away. I went on doing what I was doing, and then I met April, and she was just totally different. She's like, I'm not like these girls like you probably think. I'm not going to be letting you see other people, and whether if you want to be with me, you're going to be with me. And so, like, our first day that we were together, we actually said, all right, you'll be my girlfriend, I'll be your boyfriend, whatever. And so we've been together since. And it was just something different about her. And then as we went on, I was still me, but she would invite me to church, and I'd be like, nah, I don't want to go to church. And then I this is part of my testimony. So when I used to go to church, I remember after church you go eat, you go to a restaurant and you eat. So I was like, I'll suck it up today. I'll go hear a boring message for about an hour, and then after we'll go out to eat. The first day I did, and it was funny because the first time I went, April went to go put like a $20 bill in the tithe bucket, and I tapped her and said, "What are you doing? That's too much." And it's so silly now, but I truly thought as the world, because I see this repeated over and over, that all the church wants is your money, and that's how I thought. You know, I went in church that day saying the worship sucks. I even said the pastor looks like the devil, and I was just like, it's full of hypocrites. And the more and more I've been in my Christian walk, that's the voice of the world. You'll hear all the church wants is your money. It's full of hypocrites. It's the same language. And I was speaking the language of the world at the time. And I remember she was inviting me again, and I can't tell you, it's like that moment, right? In the twinkling of an eye, you're changed. I can't tell you the exact second it happened, but I remember going back, and I couldn't get enough.
So Christ came,
yeah,
and then He came again.
Yeah. So that's like that verse. That verse to me means a few things, right? Because physically, we know one day we'll be changed in the twinkling of an eye, but spiritually, I was changed in a twinkling of an eye. Did I plan that moment? No. So again, going back to God's timing, right? We read the word that Jesus actually seeks and saves us. So I can't tell you that specific moment. I can tell you it happened in a twinkling of an eye, that all of a sudden something within me wanted more. And I remember I was obsessed with the Word of God. I was attending back then, right? Traditional churches only have Wednesday and Sunday service, right?
Is that all they do?
Yeah.
How many do we have here right now?
We have 7 services, 7 days a week.
Okay.
So if Freedom Worship Center was around back then, I would have been here, well, 6 days, maybe watching Table Talk on the 7th day, right? I would have been here. I was all about every special event. I was about every service possible that I could go to. I was there. I just couldn't get enough, and I was getting so much and receiving, and it was just being like downloaded within me. And then the moment that really changed, and I don't know if we say a degree went up, me and April actually decided to get baptized. And I know from baptizing, because I baptized quite a few people, some of them will come back to me and say, nothing changed. I don't feel no different. And which is the case most of the time. But when I got baptized, I remember being baptized and looking up, and I don't know if it was the sun or what, but it was so bright I couldn't see for a moment. And then it was done. But then when I went back after that and I would read the Bible, it was a lot different. The Spirit was just jumping out of the pages at that time. So that's like one thing I truly believe. Like after I was baptized, I can't tell you the exact reasoning what happened, but I do truly know my understanding of the Bible all of a sudden went to another degree after I was baptized. I don't know if it was being in the obedience part. I can't exactly tell you what happened, but after that, it just I couldn't get enough, and I was starting to get words and able to kind of take them in and translate them out to others. I remember even my grandparents would tell me, I remember them saying, I think he's the one that's going to be able to explain to people what we've been teaching them all these years, because my grandparents would get in these big old arguments and debates with people, and after a while I started understanding. I'm like, well, you got to explain it like this, and then after that, shortly after, because I was in church all the time, Pastor Richard Garcia came to me and he's like, have you ever thought about being a minister? And I said, well, I've had dreams about it, because I started having dreams. And he's like, I really believe you're called to minister, because he noticed something even different after I was baptized too. And I don't know if he labeled it down that, but that was after that he started noticing. And I was just, again, I just was downloading all this information. I was hearing sermon podcasts. That's when I first learned about podcasts, because I was out there buying every CD I could. And after podcasts, I was just downloading over and over. Gregory Dickow was one of my favorites. There's so many pastors, Pastor Joseph Prince, and it just kept going on. And Jimmy Evans and Tony Evans, and even now I have so many. Ron Carpenter that I'm just so I need to hear it. It's not like one of those things I want to hear it. I need to hear it. And it's crazy because even sometimes I look back and I'm like, am I doing my devotions enough? And then when I really think about it, I'm like, I do my devotions in the morning. Throughout the day, I hear sermons. I hear worship throughout the day. Before I go to bed, I put on sermons. And then I'm like, nah, I'm not doing enough. Just kidding. I really see that it's become part of my life, that even at times when I'm like, am I doing enough? And it's really not about doing enough or hearing enough. It's just who I am now, and it's part of my day. And so God's timing for it, you know, when I see through my life again, I didn't know when I was going to be saved. I didn't plan to say, oh, when I'm 26, right? I used to have that mindset when I was in the world. Well, after I'm done having fun, then I'll go to church, and then I'll seek Christ. Because I did, even at that time, I knew there was going to be a day of judgment when I was like, I'll be like those people and maybe have a deathbed confession or something.
Get the last one in when I can. I want to float something out there. I want to float something out there because I think it ties in very well with the theme of the program, just generally. I was thinking about this today. If I were to present this in a nutshell, when we talk about people being born again, we generally attribute people gaining things. Paul's argument in 1 Corinthians 15 lays out that humankind, through redemption, salvation, because of the sin entering through Adam, as the Bible describes, that we're saved to that place before sin entered into the world, right?
Yeah.
So I have thought for quite some time that we often treat redemption in the Christian life as a process where we develop, could we say, habits of holiness? And, I've heard people use the phrase being born again in reverse, right? And they usually use that to describe someone who was saved and then goes back and struggles, right? They say that person is born again and going the wrong direction.
Yeah.
The whole idea about being born again is less about, when you said, well, I came out of the water and I don't know if it was the sun for a second, I couldn't see, but then that's all I could see, right? Like all you could see was the Word of God.
Yeah.
And that, brothers, is I think the key difference. It's understanding one's identity in Christ, right? So if you steal the wrong identity, if you are an identity thief and you steal the wrong identity, you end up in a worse state that you were before, right? Like, there was a time in my life that if someone had stolen my identity to try and, get credit, it wouldn't have worked out well,
Yeah.
right? Like, if they were trying to get out of a ticket or not get arrested or something, right? Using my identity wouldn't have been a great way to go, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to make sure we understand the right identity. And all I was thinking about when you were describing that is just this idea that, to God looks at the death of things as we consider the death of things to be a new beginning, but not really a new beginning as in starting over, but a return to what always was.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes that change that we look for in people, or people say, well, there's something different about you. I think that it's tied to this discussion. It's really understanding not just the words in the Bible, but knowing that you kind of came to the end of yourself. And when you're at the end, then you can realize that that's not where you were supposed to be in the first place.
Yeah.
And that changes everything.
Yeah. So even with that, some of my earliest memories was going to church, and within that, it's crazy because even I remember we used to attend Mending the Broken Hearts here in Los Angeles with my grandma, and I remember getting a prize because I could recite the Bible from Genesis to the books of the Bible, I could say them in order, and I remember getting a prize, and I'm like, I don't know if I could even do that now, but it's kind of one of those things, and from as early as I could remember, I acknowledged Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, and I believed in Him, and I see Him. I could say He's never left me, never.
Right? Right?
Yeah, even though like my life maybe didn't reflect what a Christian's walk should be.
Where's he gonna go?
Yeah.
I mean, where's God gonna go? How's God gonna leave you? Where's he going?
Exactly.
Right?
Because even during the times, or even my darkest times, I never I never was part of the drug scene or anything like that. But everything else that I did, He never left me. I remember I would even acknowledge Him being all messed up in my mind or whatever. I always acknowledged Him. I always had a fear of Him. And what's different, and it kind of sounds funny to say I've always had a fear of Him, because I actually don't fear God now. I have reverence for Him, and I have a different relationship. It's an actual love relationship, as opposed to I guess honoring and respecting Him because He is God. And that kind of goes back to my dream. I knew God was talking to me, but I didn't understand Him. And so now, where I'm at now is, because people say, fear God. I don't fear God. I don't fear God in that aspect of actual fear where I'm afraid. I have reverence for Him. The more and more I fall in love with, well, I shouldn't say fall in love. I'm in love with grace, because grace is what happened on the cross. And the more it's revealed to me, more and more, I have even more reverence and awe for what God did, sending Jesus Christ to die on the cross. And it's just like a revelation over and over. And it's just hard to explain, but I don't have that fear that I'm gonna go to hell. I truly believe that I'm gonna see Jesus. And I say Jesus because heaven's the dwelling place of God, but I want to be where Jesus is, whether He's in heaven or whether He's back on earth. I want to be with Him.
Don't say that, man. You're gonna get some denominations that will misunderstand some stuff. I don't want to be where Jesus is too.
Yeah, but God's timing within that, I see it, and I know, I don't know if we're gonna reference it, but the book of Daniel, right? And I'm summarized. I'd have to pull it up, but because I was even thinking, and I should have studied before I got here, but I was like, what was Daniel praying for that Gabriel came 30 days later?
Yeah.
Right? And some people, they would be discouraged by that, and even in the Christian world will say, well, God's not a microwave God.
Right. But that all that's rooted in time, right? Like the whole instant gratification thing has to do with not having to wait for it, right? So like there's this confusion about what time is and what time isn't, right? And that's a discussion for another day. Yeah, Daniel, we could definitely look at Daniel, but what I was really considering digging into, kind of tie it together with an argument that Paul makes in Ephesians chapter 3. I think it's
Okay.
Is he in the bathroom?
I think he
went in the bathroom. We got my kiddo running around. You should come join us, love. We've got an extra microphone. So one time, probably one time too many, somebody told me, God works in mysterious ways. And I had been reading the Bible for a while. This was several years back, and the Lord, kind of the same thing, led me on this journey where I had the chance to look very intently at scriptures that talked about mystery and revealing, what God is or isn't going to do, and how God will or won't do things, and really tied in with that argument that God works in mysterious ways. I don't want to tie the two together. When we lay out the argument about God's timing, sometimes the argument about God's timing quite literally runs over someone else, right? Like it has never sat well with me. to hear a person drive past an accident and say, well, see, the Lord kept me from being late, otherwise I would have been in that accident. Like, I'm not criticizing anybody who says that. I'm just telling you how it makes me feel when I hear somebody say that. And I think it's like a terrible thing to say, that someone else would have been handed, misery or sorrow or death or grief for the sake of your own preservation. And that's not what we see. That's not what I see in the Bible. And so when we start talking about timing, we start talking about whether we understand clearly the things that are in front of us or not. And sometimes time is the only thing that gives us that perspective when we look back on things. Often we read the Bible and consider that some of the stories contained in the text happened in what you could call a linear fashion, right? Like it's a straight line from the start of the conversation to the end of the conversation. And it's really only in retrospect that we're able to see, what people talk about understanding the full counsel of God. We often don't have the answers at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
And so it's easy to say when you're waiting in a space or you're waiting in a place where you need deliverance and you need God to do something, and you're praying and you're saying, God, please, I need you to move. I need you to move. And as you say, Daniel praying for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, however long it was, longer than most people have an attention span in church, right? Like if most people, if a prayer request takes more than just a few minutes, right, they move on to something else, right? They're like, okay, well, I guess God's not going to do anything. I got to figure it out, right? But the idea, and maybe this is just taking it back too far. Maybe this is just too many steps back. Maybe this is just too broad of a view. But the idea of discipleship becomes much less complicated and much easier to bring about and influence if you just do it all the time, right? If you just love people like Jesus does all the time, right? If you just share the gospel with the way that you live all the time, then you don't have to catch people up on the stuff that they don't know later, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the mystery comes in. Because you've had a chance to look at things, and you've had a chance to lay out retrospect, and you had a chance to read the Bible, and you've understood things in their correct context, that biblical context, that the audience is that primary hearer of that text and how it fits with them and then comes to us. This is the same passage in Ephesians 3 where Paul's talking about the mystery being revealed to him. The mystery that he talks about is that the Gentiles will be saved. And this is the same passage that goes on to describe that there isn't, any thing that a person can possess that will help them comprehend the incredible, profound nature of God's love. But yet Paul says, I understand it.
Yeah. Well, that was a big mystery, right? The Gentiles, because throughout their history, the Gentiles were this whole group that they didn't want nothing to do with, and then all of a sudden, and I was reading what I'll think, but that Jesus was talking about, that I'll bring the Gentiles that weren't looking for me, that they found me, and that's kind of sounds crazy because we know Jesus seeks and saves us, but it says that was in Isaiah. I think it might have been in Isaiah that the Gentiles would find him. People would find him that he wasn't out to get.
Yeah, there's some in Isaiah. It's with stammering lips. These people who praise me. Yeah, the reality is that God made the world and everything on it, and if everything is sustained, this was something I was reading and thinking about earlier. If everything is sustained by Christ, and Christ himself is not divided, as the Bible tells us, right? Then all of those things are unified in Christ, right? And so it changes the nature of the mystery, and it really turns it into a Captain Obvious moment. Like, wow, that's pretty obvious. It's right in front of me, and I couldn't see it.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that what we say about the Pharisees?
Yes.
Isn't it fair to say, I'm using the word fair, not with the word Pharisee, but is it equitable? Is it fair to say that there are times that we, in the community of faith, find ways to just jump right back into Pharisaical legalism. I think we need to be corrected when we end up there.
Yeah, well, it's very easy because it becomes one of those things. If they don't look like us and they're not doing what we're doing, then they're not part of us. And that's kind of like, you could even see that, you know, with the Gentiles, the Jews up until that point, you know, they were like, they're not of us. We're not intermarrying with them. This is us. They don't look like us. They don't do what we do. They're not part of us, right? And of course, you know, at the time, people were worshiping, you know, pagan gods and different things. But kind of going back to history, well, history with that, a lot of the ways people did worship and the ways they honored their so-called gods, some of it goes back to, and this is the way I always think, right? You had Noah, his 3 sons. To me, it's like whoever hung out with Noah more probably knew more of what was expected and kind of how you.
They would know more.
Yeah, they would know more.
Did you just do that?
No,
oh man.
They would know more about God, right? Because then, ideally, we tend to think, well, Shem hung out with Noah, because even and I don't mean to get into this, but there's some people who believe that Shem was actually Melchizedek, which that's kind of another subject as well. But Shem was actually alive when Abraham was around.
He would know a lot.
Yeah. And so then you get this thought that Abraham knew because Shem was around, and then it's just who stayed around longer, because we get a thought too, even going back with Adam, right, and Adam's sons. We know Abel was gone, but now you have Cain and Seth. Well, we assume Seth hung around with Adam more, and Cain kind of was banished or went to his own area.
He would know about.
Yeah.
Right.
So Seth would have more knowledge, and then later on would beget Noah, and then, you know, so we get that, and then Shem, and then Abraham, and then the Jews. But then there's this weird stuff, because when you read in history, I can't think of his name off the top, but when he was trying to curse Israel, and then he understood about God, then it tells you, well, where did he get that information? Mm-hmm. He wasn't from Israel.
The error of Balaam, is that?
Yeah, I believe. Yeah. So
well, and you know, you think, looking at Balaam, you'd think he'd know about God.
Yeah, but he didn't know about that. But see, even that, he had an idea who God, and to me, it kind of got. To me, I always think it got watered down throughout the Gentiles, of what you consider the Gentiles, and then they kept kind of the mainstream of information.
Was Noah a Gentile?
Noah? Well, yeah, Noah was Gentile, but
there was no Jew. Could you be a Gentile if there is no Jew?
But see, that's kind of the reverse effect. Now we go back to the Pharisees, and then we go back to the lineage of Jesus, mm-hmm. who at the end ends up Adam, and then Adam's dad's God.
Right.
I mean, so how can you discount anyone from Adam on?
Woo, boy, we're about to cover some hot topics here at Table Talk. Well, please join us every Monday at 5 p.m.
Yeah. But even figuratively, you know, when Joshua crosses the Jordan River, and it says that it rolled back all the way up to the city of Adam, mm-hmm. and it cut off the Dead Sea.
It's great figurative language.
Yeah,
I don't disagree.
So that's where it gets a little crazy, and then it doesn't help that Jesus tells, you know, was it the Samaritan, when she and I know I'm stumbling a little bit, but she wanted something, and maybe you can help me, and she says even the dogs eat the crumbs off the table. So right away, you know, people are like, oh, he's all about the Jews and forget the Gentiles, but yet he went and talked to the Samaritan woman, who would be considered a Gentile of some sort, because they weren't full-blown Jews. The Jews actually hated the Samaritans, but he went out.
It's the conversation, right? You worship there, we worship here.
Yeah. And so going back to kind of that Pharisee attitude, it's like, you don't do things the way we do it, you're not part of us. And that's kind of an ugly place to be, because even I had a conversation with a guy recently, and he said, "Well, my mom knows of God, but she don't attend church." And so I said, "Well, does that change her relationship with God?" "Well, as a Christian, she should be going to church." And I'm like, "Well, is that your expectation of what a Christian should be?" Because even going back to my life before, I truly, I believe, started walking with the Lord. I still knew Jesus, and all the while, and I still prayed to him. So if I didn't tell you my life as a kid or as a young adult, when I would have figuratively strayed away, you would think I was a Christian. I prayed to him. I knew Jesus Christ was my Lord. I knew he was the one that would save me. I just wanted to put off the saving because I wanted to gratify the flesh. But if I just told you that I went to church when I was a kid, I went to church when I was in high school, I prayed to God. I would read my Bible every once in a while. I'd open it up to read it. You would generally think, well, oh, he's a Christian. He believes the same way we do. But my walk in life at the time wasn't your kind of example of what a Christian would be. But even at that time, I think, would I have been saved?
I think this is where we run into one of those perceived Bible contradictions. Like the conversation with the friend, saying, and my mom believes in God, but doesn't go to church. It's a thin argument to say that keeping the Sabbath holy means going to church on Sunday. If you want to make that argument, you're welcome to. It's a thin one. Going to church isn't in the Bible. Not being a jerk to people is.
Yeah.
And people sometimes get far more focused on whether or not you're going to church as like an outward sense of how they're gauging how you're doing in life, but they totally neglect the whole point that they're not supposed to be a jerk.
Yeah.
Right? And like that for me has always been, since I become a Christian, that's always the thing that sort of pops up. Even when I do it, I'm like, yeah, I don't think the Bible's okay with that, right? But I'm making sure people are, doing what doctrine says.
But I love you too much to leave you like that.
I love you too much to leave you like that. Right,
Yeah.
right. God loves you enough that He'll let you stay like that as long as you want. Still love you.
Yeah. Yeah. So even going back, kind of what you were saying, the examples and being that person, that's who you are. So my grandpa is in my eyes my best example of a godly man. Okay, if my grandpa were to be expected to write something in the Bible, there'd probably be nothing. And why do I say that? Because my grandpa's a very quiet man, and he lives it. He doesn't speak. It's not lip service with him. My grandpa's very quiet, but you could genuinely see Christ in him. And so when I look at that, like, you can't put that in words. He lives it. And so I just look at his life, and when he did speak, he's still around, when he does speak, it means something. It's not just to fill in the conversation or whatnot.
So he's not a preacher, is what you're saying.
No, but he's ministered to me all my life. Just he's gentle. He's, since I could remember, and I know there was a side of him before I didn't know.
Sure.
But nothing foul comes out of his mouth. He don't talk about people. He's genuine. And even till this day, my grandparents don't attend church anymore. But does that mean, like, oh, you're going to hell or you're out? No, because they minister to their grandkids, their children, and they live the faith.
You end up becoming just a holy man pushing redemption, right? Like, there's no relationship. It's just like, it's the hard sell, right? Like, Casey and I, we had dinner at a burger place, and wait staff comes up and was so over the top with presentation that it almost seemed that individual was pretending to be from somewhere else. So much so that the individual, and I'm not kidding, the individual literally asked us, "Where do you think I came from?" And Casey gave his answer, and I'm ambivalent. I don't care. So I said, and so the individual told us where they were from, and it was just almost to the point of it being not genuine, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens sometimes with what you described.
Yeah.
When we make whether or not you're attending church a condition of whether or not God blesses you, or whether or not I extend love to you. I think you do probably one of the most dangerous things. And this is what I'm coming to understand. Anytime a human being tells God or anyone else where Christ is or isn't, you run the risk of being wrong.
Yeah.
And the less rigid I am in where Christ is and Christ isn't, here's what I've discovered. I'm not sowing division.
Yeah.
And I would like to continue my life not sowing division. It works great.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's so we both like camping. I've ran across a lot of godly people camping.
Sometimes the only way to stay around holy people, right?
Yeah, and it's just sparking up a simple conversation, right? I remember me and Luciano, we were camping, and
You went camping without us?
well, yeah, it was one of the times without you. The guy next to us heard me call him brother, and he's like, "Oh, you guys are brothers?" I'm like, "Brothers in Christ." "Oh, I'm a brother in Christ too."
Yeah,
and,
fellowship.
And so we had fellowship, and we hooked up with texting and whatnot. Texting.
We hooked up.
Hooked up.
This is now the universal signal for I connected with another human being. This is an emotional response. I love you.
Yeah. You know what I do, and I was talking to leadership about this yesterday.
Which is why I wasn't invited.
Yeah. I tell them, when I meet new people, I ask them, "Are you on Facebook?" And if they are, I'll get my phone and say, "Here, look yourself up." Yeah. And then when they look themselves up, I'll friend them, and then that's the way I interact with them. Because a lot of times you'll say, "Oh, we should hook up or we should hang out," and it never happens.
So what? If I'm understanding you correctly, you are meeting people and not wanting to actually hang out with them. You are trying to distance them by only connecting with them on Facebook. Do I understand that right?
Exactly.
Okay, all right. I mean, hey, if you want to come to a place where you can be loved, come to Freedom Worship Center.
Facebook is awesome.
Facebook is great.
Let me tell you why.
People are losing their minds over it.
Because when people show up, that this is going to sound awful coming from me. When people show up that I invited to church, and I'm like, oh, they actually came.
Yeah.
I pull out my Facebook, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's their name. Hey, how's it going? So and so.
See, that's a pastor there, man. He's like, I will find a way to remember you.
Or you just call him, hey brother, hey sister.
Right.
That's the universal. I don't remember your name. It's kind of messed up, but I have a bad memory. I got hit in the head too many times fighting, so
that sounds that sounds like blame shifting. It sounds like you're blaming the devil for something you need.
No, the 12 guys I fought, my coach.
Are you sure it wasn't your grandma? Yeah. Like, there's that button on the backside of my head that.
Well, my dad credits me having a flat head from him smacking me in the back of the head while I was young, but yeah, my coaches used to always tell me, don't block with your face.
Yeah, that's usually not a good idea.
So that's probably where some of my memory went, but
no bueno.
But no, I just find just if I'm honest, as opposed to me going, which I never really do, but go and be like.
You mean be honest or something else?
Well, be honest.
The sheep and wolves clothing?
Well, I did say it behind a pulpit one time. I've met more people and I ministered more to people than when I intentionally or unintentionally would just hanging out. Just being like kind of going back to that being authentic. Just hanging out. And I've met more people and got to share God, and some of mine and April's testimony with people just hanging out, as opposed to I'm gonna go out today, I'm gonna make it a point that I'm gonna go do outreach and this and that. and it's just, you know, people see it. People know who's genuine most of the time. They just sense it, and it's going back again, not presenting yourself as someone you're not, and because people will see through it too. Eventually it'll come out, and just being genuine, and you know, um, genuinely loving people. I know that's kind of one of those words. Oh, I love people. I truly do love people through the lens of Christ, and I say that because I see value in everybody. There's times that I feel like I fall short as a pastor or even just a person with people that are around me, and I feel like I failed them. But then, you know, it just makes me think, how do I improve in that area, and how do I not feel like this later on? And particularly, I'm talking about some stuff that happened recently. You know, I had gotten a phone call when I was out of town, and I was just like, it's work. That's what I recognize is, it's work. I'm off. I found out later that this person's son had passed away, and they needed spiritual counsel. So I got back to him a week later. So that really messed me up as a minister. I'm like, I wasn't there for them, you know. So it just makes me think, you know, and I know we say, you know, separate. In this particular instance, it was something I related to work, but I'm like, it makes me think, like, whether it's work or not, do I be there for people, whether it's in this atmosphere or not? And not to say that I'm going to overwork myself, but to realize, you know, that there's certain things I could have done, and I don't want to regret nothing that my choices, but I feel bad. I feel bad that I wasn't there. And then another instance came up to where I was just booked for the day, and one of our friends wanted us to go pray with his father because he's going to pass. My schedule didn't allow me to do it, and so then I felt like I failed there too. And so the more I think through these things, I'm like, well, you know what? I need to really start relying on the church as a whole. If I can't be there, I need to make a phone call and have someone else be there. Yes, I don't have to do it all, but I got to realize within myself that I don't have to do it all, and I need to start reaching out. So that way I don't feel like this at the end, and I could know, well, I offered this, and that's what I did to show that I was there for them, even though maybe I couldn't be there for them.
That was a tough lesson for me to learn too.
Yeah. And so I don't know if that plays in with God's timing, or my timing was just not, my timing may have not been the best, but I really don't. That's one of those things I try not to live with regret. I just try to learn how to grow from it and do things better, and better, both in my life and spiritually for other people, because as a pastor, there's expectation that you're going to get it right, and my expectations is I'm terrible at a lot of that stuff, and I just want to be better at those areas, just so I could help people more especially during their times of need, and I'm seeing it as I don't necessarily have to be that person.
Yeah, I think I'll tell you that to quote myself, I think I said it. The Lord said it as good as it could have been said yesterday. You know, Jen and I have been talking for years about how ministry really should serve all ministry as a platform for provision. What's being provided, you know, what's being supplied. But, you know, you can point at a bunch of things in the Bible. We often end up, when it comes to ministry, that you've got folks that are looking to be people in positions of power. And what I see in successful church leadership, what I see that you are doing in this church, is not approaching it from such a limited and narrow focus that someone has to be in power. And so what what you see here, this environment, is one that puts people in positions of opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's where that help comes from. It's those people who may need that opportunity. You've done a tremendous job, leading this church in those ways.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things like to rely on the body, not yourself. And
Well,
I'm learning that
body,
pretty
right?
quickly.
It is the body.
Yeah. So it's been great. Hopefully next week, I don't know if we'll continue on with God's timing. I know Pastor Ken would probably have a lot to say about it. But it's been great.
It's been great.
Glad you guys could join us today. Join us next week. We're going to continue on in this platform, and we'll have Pastor Ken Saul with us. I know he probably has a lot to say about God's timing in this particular subject. But we thank you guys for joining us. Any last remarks, or we good to go? All right, God bless you guys, and thank you guys for joining us today.
That button is supposed to be a different song, folks. Kind of hard to sing along. No words. But hey, thank you so much for joining us for Table Talk every Monday at 5 p.m. live from the studios at Freedom Worship Center, 727 Cortez Street Southeast, Los Lunas, New Mexico, 87031. Want to extend our special thanks to Pastor Ness and Abel Minabat and the entire staff here at Freedom Worship Center for creating this opportunity for us to be able to share the Word of God with you. Thank you all. God bless you, and have a great night.